Hello everyone and welcome to Staying Ahead of the Curve. I'm Jeff Snyder, Vice President, Senior Consultant with CAMAC Retirement Group, and we're here at the Defined Contribution Institutional Investment Association's Public Policy Forum, and we're very pleased to have as a guest Charlotte Clark. She is the Director of the United Kingdom's pension system. Charlotte, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And I noticed you have your tea.
I do have my tea.
I did not have mine.
No.
I drank a cup of coffee. It was a late night last night.
Well, not for us to kind of, just be stereotypes.
Absolutely. But thanks for joining us. And I know you were speaking earlier to the group, along with your colleague, your compatriot in Australia,
Yep.
about some of the differences and some of the benefits of the UK system. I'm wondering, would you mind sharing some high-level thoughts about the UK system? And I know you've had some time to take a look at the US system, but let's go with the UK system first.
Okay, I'll focus on what changes we've had in the DC system.
Sure,
We can talk more
absolutely.
broadly, but let's start there. So the UK has been undergoing just a major reform. So I think like a lot of Western economies, our provision for retirement had dropped off through the 80s and 90s. So early 2000s, we set up a pension commission to look at this and kind of address the problem. Their recommendations included a system of automatic enrolment. So for every employer in the UK, they have to have a retirement savings system plan, and they have to automatically enroll their employees into it. So that reform has been implemented. So it went live in 2012, and we've been implementing it for the last 5 years. We've still got a couple more years to go through, because we've got to get through every single employer in the UK. But it's been a real game changer for us. We have increased the number of people with retirement provision by 7.5 million. We've still got a couple more million to get through, and it means that regardless of where you work, so a bit like the US system, we had under coverage in smaller micros, amongst lower earners, amongst part-time workers, and we've seen massive increases in their participation.
So, one of I think we're facing some more challenges getting people to save, put money away. Just people don't think about the long term.
Yeah.
The auto-enrollment provision, is there a certain percentage that people are required to contribute to the plan?
Yes, so they're required to contribute. Let me talk about where our end state is, and I can tell you where we currently are.
Thank you.
So our end state is 8%.
Okay.
So we want people to contribute 8% of their earnings. It's on a band, so it doesn't start on £0, it starts about 5,000, it goes up. Of that, 3% comes from the employer, 4% comes from the individual, and 1% comes from the government in the form of tax relief. So for every pound I put in as an individual, it'll be matched pound for pound by the government contribution and the employer contribution. So you're doubling your money straight away.
So you've got, every employer has to contribute to this, and every employee within any employer group has to contribute to this.
Yeah, so the only employer that doesn't have to run this is the armed forces, because you're not allowed to opt out of an armed forces pension for lots of good reasons. But every other employer has to offer this as the minimum. They can offer more, they could offer a defined benefit as long as it meets a certain standard, but they've got to be able to offer this, and they've got to contribute if the individual stays in.
So as you were, so one of the things that I think, obviously you're here in the U.S. and you're sharing the insights into your system. When you were looking at reform, did you look around the world and look at other systems? Did you look at the U.S. system? Did you look at the Chilean system? I mean, talk a little bit. We're very interested about process here,
Absolutely.
so you could share some of that.
So we looked everywhere, because innovation is great, but so is actually learning from other people and finding out what works. So we certainly looked at the Chilean system. That wasn't one of the great kind of drivers for us. We looked at KiwiSaver in New Zealand, which had started auto-enrolment. It's a slightly different system. It's not just for retirement savings, the New Zealand system. And we looked at the Australian system, the superannuation system. But Jenny, who was here, they have a compulsion, and all of the contributions come from the employer. And as I was saying in the session, I think politically that's quite a big step. She was talking about how that came about, and I don't think the conditions in the UK were the same. So this sense of in the UK system of the employer putting in, the individual putting in, the government putting in, of that being a kind of tripartite kind of agreement, was where we got to. But to be blunt, I mean, we basically stole, the ideas of heritage and, all of the kind of work, people like Bridget Madrian and all the behavioural science people who were very active at the time coming up with auto-enrollment and how that worked.
I mean, it's really been game-changing here in the States. Auto-enrollment, for the most part, many corporations, maybe private sector, retirement plans utilize it in order to make sure that participants are contributing, although they can always opt out if they choose not to. But Inertia tends to work for the plan as opposed to against the plan.
Yeah. So what we see, so when we started, our estimate was that we would have about 30% of people opting out, and that was based on some evidence from the US and a lot of kind of user research with individuals. The actual number is about 9%. So 9% of people choose to opt out when they're put in. So it's been much more successful. That power of inertia is very strong. It's very strong amongst the groups that perhaps you least expect it to be. Younger people are much more likely to not opt out. Lower earners are much more likely to not opt out. So lots of groups where you see traditional under-provision are really kind of benefiting from it.
Can we change gears a little bit and talk about some of the investments that are utilized? Here in the States, we have mutual funds, we have what are called target date funds, where you kind of set it and forget it, and that seems to be all the rage over the last decade or so. I think the audience would be very interested to hear about how the investment structures what they look like in the plans.
I'm sure your audience will be very relieved that as a kind of public civil servant, I don't try and design kind of investment structures. I mean, the way it works in the UK is we have a trust-based model, or contract-based, but essentially it's for the different investment kind of oversights to kind of decide what they think is the right structure. There is something in legislation which basically says it needs to be lifestyled, you need to make sure that it's appropriate, but we don't try to go much beyond that. I mean, we haven't talked about Nest, but as part of our reform we set up a scheme, and they have been very innovative in the kind of investment side, really looking at so much of investment has been driven by high net worth individuals. As we're bringing in more people into retirement savings and they're taking on these risks, there's a question about, well, do you need a different investment strategy? And so Nest have done a lot of good work, really looking at people's kind of risk appetite, their loss aversion, and really thinking about, so what we don't want is, to get people into retirement savings for the first time. They're young, so of course the traditional idea is, well, they can take risks, so that they won't mind volatility because these are young people and they like risky things. And of course, that proves to be not true at all.
I think based on their experiences in 2008, as an example, I mean, they tend to be more risk averse. Millennials tend to be more risk averse.
Absolutely.
Governance. So big issue here in the U.S. with corporate, private sector retirement plans, oversight, and many retirement plans have boards and committees. How does that work? I mean, who oversees? Are there multiple people? Are there multiple groups that have the governance and oversight of the plan?
So generally, I mean, in the trust-based model, we have a board of trustees. They have a fiduciary duty. Their fiduciary duty is to the members of that scheme. They can only do things which are in the best interests of that member or the members. And that's seen us pretty well, I'd say. On the contract-based side, so that's the big insurance companies, we have introduced independence governance committees. So they are there to try and kind of be a quasi kind of trustee and say, actually, you've got, as the board of them, you've obviously got your shareholders that you're reporting to. We're the people who are here to just kind of say, is this appropriate for the people who are investing? And
then negotiate fees or contracts, and that that's part of that fiduciary responsibility, at least here in the U.S.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the UK, fees are an interesting one. So, since we introduced auto-enrollment, we saw a significant drop in fees. So, I would guess the average fee before auto-enrollment was probably 100, 150 basis points. since auto-enrollment, because you're getting rid of a lot of the costs in the system.
Yep.
You're getting rid of marketing, you're getting rid of acquisition.
Absolutely.
You know, so we saw big increases in big decreases in costs. So you saw plans being sold at 30, 40, 50 basis points. The Nest scheme is about 50 basis points. We did put in a charge cap for these schemes. So if you want to use a scheme for auto-enrollment, that's fine, but you cannot charge more than 75 basis points all in, leaving aside some things like transaction costs.
Sure.
But essentially there's a cap on what can be charged in an auto-enrollment scheme.
And then who does the record-keeping administration? Is that done within, is there a separate company that does that, or is that part of the government? Or?
So that's part of So let's say I'm an employer and I get my letter from the regulator saying your data's come. They'll say go to our website, have a look at this. There's duties checkers. So what have I got to do? So we try to keep it as simple as possible. 5 steps. When it comes to choosing what your plan is, we would say, if you were a very small employer, we might say, look, we set up Nest for you. So if I was employing somebody, let's say I employed a nanny, it might just say, look, we set up Nest for you. You can go and have a look at other options if you want, but essentially, that's the one that you might use. If I was a larger employer, so maybe I had 20, 30 staff, then it would say, there's this list of schemes that have met a certain standard, On there would be schemes like People's Pension, which used to be the old building and construction industry scheme. So you have a whole list of kind of different ones. You'd also have some from the insurance side as well. So some of the big insurers who have chosen to be on that list as well.
So it's like an a la carte menu, but they're all reviewed and evaluated to make sure that they meet certain provisions, certain levels.
Yeah, so in order to get on that, you have to have met certain auditing standards. You have to have said that you want to be on it as well, and that you're not going to turn away business.
You're committed to the business, you're committed to the mission, the fiduciary responsibilities of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's on the horizon, things that you're thinking about in terms of further improving the plan, making it better for people? We just had a conversation with Preston Rutledge from the Senate Finance Committee. He was talking about things that the chairman and the committee are thinking about in terms of initiatives. We've been doing that a while in DCIA and throughout the industry. What are things that you're thinking about in the UK?
So 2017 is a big year for us because it's kind of 10 years since we did our legislation. So when we did our legislation, we agreed that we'd do a kind of independent review at this point. So we're in the middle of that at the moment. So I could talk through the themes of what we're looking at. So one is coverage. So there are some groups which don't benefit from auto-enrollment. So very low earners, self-employed, because we use the employer as the kind of conduit for this. Then it's a big discussion about whether or not we should be expanding the coverage. Not too much discussion about whether or not there's certain groups. There's some discussion about maybe seasonal workers and them not being involved. But on the whole, it's largely about how do you expand the coverage. The second kind of theme is contributions. So when we have completed, we will be at 8%. 8%. Some people would argue is not enough. I think our minister has said that he thinks that it'll have to be above 8% eventually. But we're taking evidence on that. We've said we're not going to make a decision this year because we're still at 2%. We've got to get to 8% over the next couple of years. So we want to see whether or not you see a lot of people dropping out at that point.
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I know that from our research here that I've seen in the U.S., it's double digits what you need to actually contribute in order to have that pool of money that you need to pay for health care and all the things in retirement.
Yeah.
But it takes time to get there. Preston was just talking about what we call popping the cap on the pension the cap at 10%, and they just did that, and we need to, maybe that's something that happens longer term.
Yeah, you need to build up kind of consensus for these sorts of kind of increases, don't you? Jenny and I were having the discussion both on the panel and outside. They're at 9.5% going up to 12% over the next decade or so. I think there's a question about, I think our system is really designed to try and help low median earners, and what is the right contribution limit for them? And you know, if you start to go up to, I've certainly heard people say, you know, 15% and above. We don't have the healthcare issue in the UK in the same way that you do in the States, but you know, I think that trying to get that evidence as to what is the right contribution level and how do you set it in a system, because you've got people, women in particular, taking career breaks early on in their careers. That makes a difference. At the same time, not wanting to, people, you know, money is tight. It's always tight. You know, you don't want people to be putting money into retirement, which they really ought to be spending now.
One of the things that we're focusing on here in the States in our system is the drawdown, and we constantly are wrestling with annuitization.
Yep.
And I think that's something that you all do or are thinking about doing. Wonder if you could talk about the drawdown perspective. So you got this pool of money. How do you get it out? How do you do it in a way that is meaningful and impactful to the individual participant?
So the UK, I think, is different from other countries in that up to 2014 we had compulsory annuitization, which, you know, is very different from the US, very different from Australia. That rule got changed, so we removed compulsory annuitization. You know, we're looking at that now, and I wouldn't want to suggest that we're about to reverse it. That's not the case. I think what we're looking at is what's the right sort of product that you want for retirement, because people, you know, when things like the, you know, annuities were brought in the UK, I mean, people's retirement was 10 years, 15 years, you know, and you were managing your, you know, your longevity risk pretty much from the point that you retired. Whereas now, you know, people who retire 60, 65, I mean, you're very unfortunate if you're dying in that first decade. So maybe an annuity isn't the right product. Maybe you need something which has got better investment returns. At the same time, you know, longevity risk, you know, is a major issue within all pension systems.
We're all living longer.
Exactly.
We have good health care and it keeps us going.
Yeah, no, it's a great stat. It's a really good book. I assume it's probably published in the US, called The 100-Year Life, by some English kind of public policy academics. You know, the stat in there is, you know, if you're born in most places in England at the moment, you know, you've got a 50-50 chance of living to 100. You know, that's a whole different perspective on retirement. And
here in the US, if you have that life expectancy to 95, 100, and you retire at 65, so the retirement age issue is something that we are talking about too. So then it means you have 35 years of which this pool of money, and I know our healthcare systems are different, but the expectation is that you're going to need somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 of money for healthcare.
Yeah.
So all that is compounding, and it's forcing the industry and people to save more and focus on vehicles that will help facilitate that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to give the impression that health isn't an issue in the UK. I mean, it's not so much health, but long-term care. You know, and there's a very broad debate about, well, what do we do about this? You know, as we have people living longer, requiring care well into their 90s and beyond. How do you finance that, and how do you support it?
Well, it seems like there's a lot of similarities and some differences, but hopefully we can continue to share best practices.
Absolutely.
And we can all kind of come to what is the best of breed or the best of all worlds. Charlotte Clark, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks.